Okay, so I don't think anyone else is joining us this evening, chaps, which is cool. So I'll start with your kind of introductions and kind of especially for yourself, Alex, to kind of know a bit more about me, and then we'll kind of crack in and get to the juicy bits. So that's all right. I'm guessing you can both see my screen, okay, right?
Yeah,
Great, cool.
yeah, fine,
Right,
thank you.
no problem. So so just to kind of kick off then, so a bit kind of personal information around me. This is kind of what I do outside of my working life, and a lot of variety and kind of physical activity, and challenges, which is a kind of a very big kind of personal trait and value that I have kind of in life. So on the kind of top two left images is the Yorkshire Free Peaks and the National Free Peaks. So these are what I did a few years ago. Um, Great community spirit, great challenging, and it's quite the challenge of actually being at a steady pace rather than kind of some other challenges which are quite fast paced and high intensity. But so I'd love to do that. The picture next to that is my ice bath, which I'm sure Matt has very seen that all over the place. But so ice bath is kind of again another physical challenge, but actually the rewards and the benefits that you get out of that in terms of kind of cellular mindset, that kind of stuff is kind of really big. Kind of one of the biggest things that I do and I love the most is strength training. And this is kind of going into more strongman training at the moment as well, which I'm potentially signing up for a competition next year. So love training 3 to 4 times a week, and then within that, I'll then dip out from here. So then on the bottom left is the York, not the York, the Lisbon Marathon, which I did 2 years ago, which was probably the hardest challenge that I've had to face to date. When you're running in Sheffield at 10 degrees in the pouring down rain to then going out and doing 29-degree marathon was quite the challenge itself. But we did it. So that was a group of uni friends that we kind of get together every year and do some challenges. The one in the bottom middle is me doing the London to Brussels self-supported bike ride. So we did that in July this year, where four of my friends we set off from South London and over 3 days cycle over to Brussels, which is awesome. And the image at the bottom right is there is a men's group that I kind of am part of, and every Saturday morning we go and visit around the Peak District or Sheffield and dip into freezing cold rivers. Make a lot of noise and then go for breakfast after. But really good thing to kind of get outdoors and venture and just see what's around. So that's a pretty much an intro over me. And then in this kind of segment here is more about the business itself and what we do. So we have a sports injury clinic based in Kelham Island. We have 4 treatment rooms. We've got 9 therapists. We've got personal trainers, and we've just started bringing in a sports psychologist and working with a chiropractor to create a holistic team around injury rehabilitation, but also kind of performance training and be able to support people. Our main focus are those with recreational sports. So anyone from who's a pole dancer that like lifting weights to runners. We've got an old ladies class that we put on. And it's just about just providing a very inclusive environment that's just helping people remain as fit and healthy as possible for as long as possible. So we've got on site, we've got our gym, which we've seen some of these pictures. And then, like I say, it's just a real big passion that we've got around to kind of doing it and building the team to kind of help support that. And that's all done kind of through these two models or practices, in which way you want to kind of call it, which is combining both sport and exercise therapy, which I'm sure Alex you'll know is around the assessment, the treatment, the management of injuries, but then the strength and conditioning and how we can develop characteristics to certain goals and how we can do that over long-term plans, but also short-term plans and being able to be adaptive in that. And I like to kind of say that's where Made to Move are really sat in the middle and kind of trying to help lead this recreational approach to injury rehabilitation and performance training to do it, because often we know there's delayed access to healthcare in kind of in the public aspect, and often there's not enough guidelines around to help people actually get out of pain or injury and get them back to kind of competing or at least a better quality of life than what they're doing before. So that's kind of how we sit. So tonight's action plan. So we should probably be about till about 1/2 past or so, maybe a bit longer. Depends how much I rabbit on for. But what we're going to be focused on is some misconceptions around kind of flexibility We're going to look at some different types of stretching, and then we're going to look at then some of my top tips how to do that. And then, if relevant, how we can help you, or more, how we can potentially pass it on to someone that you might know that might be needing some assistance. Does that sound all right to you both?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sounds
sounds
perfect.
great.
Excellent. Any questions so far?
Mm-mm,
No?
no thanks.
And okay, so then I'm going to put it over to you guys then. What would you say is maybe a common misconception that you might think is around flexibility, whether that's training, whether that's ability to do it, etc. It's done the crowd now.
So, what I'll share, Rory, is with my yoga teaching background is a common thing that, yoga and the kind of things that you do, there are similarities there, of course, but they'll come to me and say, but I'm not flexible, so I can't do yoga.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, let's think about this in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, yeah.
um, yeah, that was the first thing that came to mind.
No, that's brilliant. And yourself, Alex?
I feel like I'm probably inside of that misconception a little bit. I feel like in my head, I just somewhere down the line I've seen stuff and studies. I don't know if they're right or not. Where it's like static stretching is just not good
Hmm.
compared to dynamic, and I don't know if that is a misconception or if that is what the studies like. Do you know what I mean? Whether that is like the case, but I feel like people bang on like at the clubs and stuff. They're always doing static stretching, and I feel like it's pointless. But I can't tell them because the coaches are the ones telling them.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, yeah, I do. Yeah, I think that's a huge thing, and I guess definitely in the research out there, static stretching, and especially the way that most people apply it, um, it might do 10 to 15 seconds, and they might do it at the end of a workout. And I think the papers that you're talking about, Alex, is it shows that actually people's tissue length restores back to pre-training length within like an hour. So actually, it might find that static stretching is really kind of pointless in that effect. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so maybe there's other ways we can kind of do this, and I think we'll kind of read into that. So yeah, no, thanks for sharing, guys. Um, so here's just a couple of misconceptions that I guess I gather over time, and then like Alex, kind of look into research and thinking about um, what we can do here. So kind of the first one I always see is stretching will prevent injury. And this is kind of people what they tend to do is maybe go too heavily influenced into yoga and maybe even Pilates, depending on the aspect and how the approach is, but think they're doing enough by just attending one yoga class a week. But actually, when we know the characteristics of fitness, for example, is over 5 different characteristics, such as strength, muscular endurance, agility, those kind of things as well. And I always come to the aspect of always looking at the muscles as if they're like a rope. And if we keep pulling on a rope, we're trying to ask too much for this rope. Over time, an analogy wise, these fibers can tear. And obviously, over time, if we're causing too much aggravation and damage, that could then to lead up something serious. Maybe not as bad as a rupture, for example, such as the bottom image, but something where we're kind of relying too much on that one thing to then prevent injury. When we know that the things that accumulate to injury sometimes isn't just one factor. It could be many factors or accumulation of factors as well. So it's always one we're looking at. The other thing is when we're looking at stretching and it will reduce pain, I think we now know more around how the nervous system works and how we can modulate that to then kind of a game of trickery. So I'm not sure if you've heard of the pain gate theory before, Matt.
Say that again, Rory. Sorry, the pain.
Pain gate theory.
No, I've not come across
No.
that.
So the pain gate theory is an idea around how we can kind of manipulate the nervous system and sensation to kind of avoid pain. So, for example, the things that are often used is when you fell over as a kid and you grazed your knee, and your mum will come over and she'll rub your knee really hard, create warmth on there, and almost gets rid of that pain straight away. And we now know that there's research done over time where, if, for example, if you hurt somewhere else, you pinch somewhere, or you create some kind of stimulus elsewhere, that can kind of trick how it goes. And so stretching can often be that thing. So say if, for example, someone's tweaked a hamstring, the first thing they go to do is stretch the hamstring. But if they've torn the hamstring and then they're stretching these fibers, okay, they might have a very short amount of relief, but actually in a cellular level, we could be creating more damage. So that's kind of one aspect where we think, well, it can be help reducing pain. That doesn't mean that we should maybe stop them from being active if they are in pain, but it's, again, understanding where they are at that kind of certain point of time, what the kind of triggers are for those pains, and then maybe what you could be doing, because stretching is not going to be the sole answer to that. Similarly, kind of what is going on a bit around warming up and maybe cooling down. Most people, and I'll probably say about 90% of the people we see, the warm up is, especially for runners, is a quick hamstring touch, a little bit of a swing in the arms, and then they're off on the run. And so that tends to be more of a static thing. So we know in some of the research that's coming out that if we're static stretching before we start training, we can actually have a considerable decrease in the maximum strength or power output. And so what we actually want to be doing is creating some dynamic approach. So we know that for a warm up appropriately is having that AMRAP principle of activating the heart, activating the muscle groups, warming up the body, going through some dynamic warm up, and then they're ready to go, rather than being static and going from 0 to 100 very quickly. On the kind of next points on here, we're looking at, we're often told that we need to stretch more to be more flexible. And I think that is an old misconception, when really we know that to be more flexible, we actually need to be very mobile around the joints that we're using. And so we might have a restriction of being able to get some dorsiflexion, for example, the knees over toes, but it doesn't mean that the calf muscle is tight. We can actually have some tissue. We can have the joint capsule that's stiff. We can have bones that are not moving nice and fluidly within that ankle, which is then going to stop them from actually being able to achieve a certain position. So actually doing more things outside of flexibility training, for example, mobility training, maybe strength training, which is going to kind of help get into those deeper ranges of motions, are going to help as well. I think another point in terms of the second to last one, stretching needs to be painful to work. I think there's now more understanding around, and I think Matt would agree on this, is about more breath work and actually calming down the nervous system, rather than trying to ramp straight over into a forward bend and hoping we're going to get the most flexible position out the back of it. And so everything doesn't need to be 100, but I think the 100%, it can always look at that 80-20 rule and understand that we don't need to be going 100% to try and get 100% of the results. There's actually probably other factors we can do around there to kind of help with that. And then kind of similarly as well, 5 seconds of stretching isn't going to be enough to improve flexibility either as well, because again, we've got nervous system, we've got the tissue length, we've got maybe muscle tension, tendon stiffness as well, which are going to be contributing to restrictions in flexibility. And like I say, it's just being able to understand how this tightrope analogy works, and then how we can kind of arrange protocols to improve the flexibility, because someone could do all the flexibility training in the world, but that stimulus of flexibility is probably not what they need, and is actually exploring other areas that we can kind of delve into a little bit later. Any question, gents? No?
Nothing
Nothing
so
right
far.
now, no.
No? Okay. So the next section that we're going to focus on is in the different types of stretching. I believe there's 5 or 6 protocols, but I've just gone with the most kind of popular for now. So in short, static stretching is passively stretching and holding for a certain amount of time. This time can be on different protocols. There's the top range research in terms of prescription is you should be holding a tissue or a static stretch for 2 minutes to get maximum benefit. Unfortunately, when you're prescribing exercise to individuals outside of the gym or the class or whatever environment you're in, we all know that they're not going to be doing 20 seconds, let alone 2 minutes of holding, unless they're really motivated in that certain field. So what we have to do is have to kind of regress and potentially progress that over time. So normally what we do with our clients if they're first starting out, and in terms of recommendations, we're going 15 to 20 seconds where we're going to get some tissue length change. Then over time, if they're wanting to develop these qualities, for example, then we'll push on from there. So, for example, there's a lady that I'm working with at the minute. She wants to improve her front splits, and so or front position. So we know that she's got hip flexors and hamstrings that she needs to be getting more flexible, but also there is some mobility around the hip joints and how well they sit and get pushed into those positions. So we start off really lightly as she builds up capacity and tolerance to be able to stress and have some pain as she's going through that. We're now going into kind of 45 to 60-second stretches as well. So we want to make sure that we're doing it progressive over time rather than going straight into it. Potentially what you might find in some classes, especially around yoga, is it might start easy and then start to then build up more intense positions as they go on from there. So a couple of pictures on the left hand side is a kind of passive hamstring stretch, and then we've got some hip internal rotation on that bottom left image as well. Obviously, we've got some yoga poses in here from our members, and then a couple on here. I think it's going to try and turn the volume down. Again, it's just some trap stretches, which is just to kind of representing how we might kind of prescribe some trap stretches to loosen off the kind of neck and the shoulders. That's that one. And then another video that we have is kind of a lower calf and Achilles kind of stretch. So to hit the lower part, you don't hear my voice double time. It's something that we'll kind of prescribe where we're trying to really enforce dorsiflexion. So this might be good for squatting, for example, where we're getting that knees over toe and we're using our body weight to kind of pull ourselves down over that knee and then try and get a bit of that stretch. So it's just some ideas and potential different ways we've got. Again, we've got over 200 videos on our YouTube channel, so feel free to kind of have a look for us on there, and you might find some alternative stretches that you might be able to prescribe to some people on there as well. So dynamic stretching. So dynamic stretching is basically moving in and out of ranges nice and slow, and we're just warming up the muscle groups. We're trying to get some more length in terms of the tendons and ligaments and the joint capsules in themselves as well. So the static stretching, again, will probably be done more so after exercise or in maybe some kind of aspects around flexibility training, similar to type of yoga. In terms of dynamic, we want to be seeing these at the start of training sessions or the start of classes to kind of get things warmed up. And I've just pulled up a couple of exercises that we have on our YouTube channel. Is it all unmuted? It's muted. This is a nice and easy dynamic hip flexor stretch that we're kind of just rocking kind of back and forwards, mobilizing, opening up the hips. And then we might then do something more advanced, such as the greatest stretch in the world. So pretty basic one we've got on there. We've got a dynamic shoulder circles, which again is a very popular movement in people just getting their shoulders to warm up and mobilize on the bottom left. And then up on here, we've got a bit more kind of tri-hip flexor stretch. So this one is maybe a bit of a mix between the static and the dynamic, because we're trying to focus on getting internal and external rotation on this kind of back leg by positioning the foot in different angles behind us. So this is more of an internal rotated stretch. This is more of an externally rotated stretch onto the hip. And then I think finally we then go into that center point as well, where we're then coming back and forwards into it. So a really good way we can kind of get a lot of changes going on in the hip to help mobilize. And then obviously everyone knows the cat and camel or the cow and cat, and there's many words to describe them. But again, more of a dynamic exercise where we're exploring kind of thoracic and lumbar extension and flexion and getting some kind of hip tilting into that as well. So just some exercises or just things are quickly pulled together, which kind of represent some of the dynamic stretching which is around and what we can do to help with that. Do you guys have any favorite dynamic stretches that you often prescribe?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. That's like a favorite.
Yeah, or a common?
Probably more to do with I don't know, what do you call it? Kind of like heel drops into calf raises, but not like full on heel drops.
Okay. Yeah.
Just kind of like bouncing up and down.
Yeah. Very good. Matt?
A simple sun salutation's good.
Mm-hmm.
Going through lots of different range of motion.
More of a multi-joint type of thing. Yeah. Yeah. Wicked. Okay, so then the other thing that I went, there's two more. We've got a thing called ballistic stretching. Have you heard of this, guys?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's similar to like the bouncing in and out motion, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matt?
Yeah, I've come across it only by name,
Mm-hmm.
not too familiar, so I'm interested to learn.
No. So, but yeah, so ballistic, I guess, is more of an advanced type of dynamic stretching. But what we're doing is we're trying to get into the end range, and then we're basically going in and out of that end range. And obviously, over time, we're expecting that people can then get into that outer range and be more familiar into it. So a common one we tend to see here is a gentleman prescribing kind of like a ballistic hamstring stretch, where he's basically just getting you to kind of go over into a forward fold and then starting to kind of come in and out of that aspect. So sometimes a bit more of an advanced kind of technique, and they tend to be predominantly lower body. There's not too much I've seen out there. People might use some bands or something like that, but it tends to be kind of lower body kind of base. So here's one that's often out of there. We might find that people are doing like single leg variations as well, to try and just get that kind of extra bit. And it's kind of using the nervous system a little bit and trying to just kind of make it a little bit more advanced around what they can prescribe. So that was that one. And then another one, which in 1990 is quite a common exercise that we prescribe. This gentleman here is actually kind of oscillating in that kind of external rotation position, but trying to remain upright as much as possible. So sitting within that position there, he's probably trying to get a more of a change in terms of the leg that's kind of facing towards us, where the knees like in our angle, and the angle this one here, and it's trying to promote him to be more internally rotated on that leg that is kind of towards the back, and try and promote some change into it as well. So a bit more of a kind of that used to be used quite a lot in gymnastics, but I think nowadays the actual approach in terms of what they're doing, it can be sometimes more harmful than good. So there's not loads and loads of it used nowadays. And then kind of the final kind of aspect around stretching, which we're looking at, is the neuro stretching or neuro kind of adaptation that we're trying to focus on to do it. So a common one that we've heard of is PNF stretching. Have you heard of that, guys?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I learned that when I was at uni.
Yeah. So it's quite a common one. And it's kind of then the concept is pretty much the same, is then just adopting it to different areas. So the guys on this left video, what's happening is the guy that's laying down, he's pushing his leg down into the chap on the right onto his shoulder, and they're almost going to kind of 80 to 90% of max effort, holding it for a amount of time. And as he's then relaxing, he's then pushing into this range. So what we understand around that is we're tricking the nervous system to basically contract. It fatigues that the nervous system within that process. And then you have a gap of a window of kind of relaxation, which, because of that nervous system has been basically overfired, we can then stretch into that new range, hold there, and then start that process of pushing hard into it for a period of time, relaxing it, and then pushing forward. So really kind of effective way of doing it. If you're obviously working with someone new, then you might start off with maybe 20-30% and get them to push on. And as they become more experienced, more familiar about it, you can then obviously push more into those outer ranges. So really good thing to do. And you can actually do it in kind of almost every muscle group. So we might find people that have got maybe frozen shoulder or something like that, where the nervous system is being overprotective. PNF stretching is a good way of how we can kind of bypass the nervous system a little bit and then actually get some more range of motion. So that's that one. And there's a guy on here, just a nice quick one, is just showing how he do the PNF stretch for the quads, where he's basically holding onto his ankle. He's then trying to straighten his leg as hard as he can. Obviously, he's not going anywhere. Hold that for a period of time. And as he relaxes it, he can then bring his heel towards his bum a bit more. I prefer to do this face down. So you basically haven't got much movement around the hip. So you know it's coming predominantly from the knee and kind of going from there. So just a couple of ways you can go on there. Again, you can do some more research and find out you might want to do for the shoulder, you might want to do for the wrists. It's about kind of exploring it and trying to think how you can kind of go around from there. Any questions on those, guys? No.
No, thank you.
Just going back to the ballistic, did you say that they don't use it now much because of the, did you say increased risk of, or something? You said something like an increased risk. Is that like?
Yeah. So I think what tends to happen is because we're bouncing in and out of that end range, sometimes the tissue tolerance is not used to being out there. So often what we find is when we're trying to prescribe flexibility or mobility training is actually get them to be strong in that out range. But if you're not strong in that new end range and then bouncing in and out of that, then that's where I guess the injury risk is where it's heightened up. And sometimes we can then get some nerve irritation coming off the back of it because we're kind of pushing the nerve sensation or the length or the tolerance kind of out. I call it maybe a bit more of an unsafe area. And you actually want to maybe develop someone's flexibility first before you then do something advanced like this or the PNF.
Yeah, makes sense. Cheers.
Okay, cool. So I'm just conscious of time. So what I've just then for these kind of 3 tips is kind of give you some ideas around maybe some areas that you can focus on a bit more around the nerves. So a bit more around stretching. So first of all, we know that nerve tension or neurotension can be one thing that's holding people back from flexibility. So often what we might find when we're doing a bit more of a dynamic start to someone's flexibility training is mobilizing through dynamic stretching and then potentially putting some nerve tension on just so you kind of starting to trick that a little bit. So for example, if someone's coming for lengthen their hamstrings because they want to get better at touching their toes or anything like that, then I'll start on something like a sciatic nerve glide, which is basically just holding behind the leg, tipping the toes up so we can get a real good full stretch on that on the sciatic nerve. We then just lift the leg up and down. So we're trying to glide that nerve through the pathway from the kind of the lower back area all the way down. So there's different variations you can do on these type of things, but I find doing it at this point and then holding at the end range, which you'll see in a second, and then just lifting that foot up and down. It's basically just creating tension and taking it off, creating tension and taking it off again. If someone, for example, is struggling with maybe upper body mobility or flexibility, then we might do something where we're trying to then mobilize the median nerve, which kind of covers down the center of the hand, which is one of the most common ones that do get irritated. So we're just lifting that hand up and down and creating some movement around that nerve as it passes from the kind of shoulder complex all the way down to the fingers. And you can then increase that tension by kind of nodding your head with it as well. And then finally, we've got the femoral nerve, which is similar role to the sciatic nerve, but it passes through the front of the hip, down through the front of the thigh. And so we might do something in this lunge position where we're just kind of coming back and forwards, opening up as much as we can, and then coming back. So we're really short position when we're leaning forwards, and then we're opening it right up, and then we're getting a full length of that kind of nerve as it's working through it. So there's a couple of ideas that I would normally throw out. When we're looking at maybe using weights to kind of help support them, what we would tend to find is sometimes passively we're not getting to that real true end range, and this can be more looking at mobility as well. So what we tend to use is some objects to help us kind of achieve that maybe extra 10%. So this one is a kind of advance from the lower calf stretch that I showed earlier. We use a kettlebell to really drive a force through the front. We're using the band here at the bottom to draw the talus back, which is one of the key bones that kind of limit dorsiflexion. So we're using that band to pull it back, and then we're using the weight to kind of help bring that dorsiflexion, that knees over toe. So here's one way that we can kind of use tools, weights and bands to kind of help improve. The one on the bottom here we have is a weighted external and internal rotation type of stretch. and mobility exercise. So those that might be struggling to get into external rotation or internal rotation of the shoulder, we're basically going to use the weight to help facilitate that just by putting a little bit of a stretch. On this exercise, for example, I'd start with the weight to be very light, because forcing ourselves into internal rotation is not normally too good for the shoulder, especially if someone's got a bit of a shoulder issue. So something like 0.5 kilo or 1 kilo is a really good kind of weight that they can kind of control and stabilize and still get some change in how well that shoulder kind of moves in from there. The picture on the far left is obviously me squatting, but what we tend to find is those that are struggling to kind of maybe squat unweighted, having some element of weight. Now, it doesn't have to be a bar, it could be a kettlebell, a dumbbell, anything like that can help them train to being into a nice deep squat position and not go and putting 100 odd kilos onto their back. But the reference around how we can use it is quite useful. And then the picture in here is a young weightlifter that I'm working with, who's struggling with some right hip pain. He's not internally rotating very well into his hip. So this exercise here that we're putting him through is just using a kettlebell as a bit of an added weight, getting him into internal rotation, this lunge position, and then using that weight to then kind of shift his body weight over that, and then articulating a bit of a small circle around there from as well. So a nice kind of way we can use weights as well. And then the last point in terms of my top tip is training flexibility like you would with strength. And so there's the context in terms of this is runners like to run, and if they could, they'll run every day. And especially in January, where people run every day as part of the fundraising thing, we see a lot of injuries. So what we want to be doing, we don't want people stretching to the max every day, but they might want to maybe subsidize it with a bit of mobility training, a bit of flexibility training, a bit of strength training, and kind of do it from there. So normally I find that maybe twice a week is more than enough for people to start to see a good positive change. And this picture on the right is basically something that we do when we're kind of explaining to clients around fatigue and recovery. And if we're going too high, so if we've got a training stimulus here, we're going to create an element of fatigue. Now we need appropriate rest from that to allow us to have the thing called supercompensation, which is an increase in performance or outcomes. And then we create this another training load, and then the pattern repeats. Now, if we have loads of constant stimuluses which are going all the time, we then get overreaching, overtraining, or in this potential thing, if we're overstretching, we can then start to pick up things like tendinopathies or reoccurring muscle strains. So it's just understanding how we program that around there, and how we can kind of minimize injury. And the last point around here is making it specific to you or to your client. So this will be understanding what their ability levels are. And this is a model that we've created around Move More Pain Free, is developing mobility and flexibility. And that's our key foundation of movement quality. And then if we're making sure that's right, we can then start to develop stability protocols, or even taking people into strength and skill-based things as well. So it's just having an informed decision around how we do that, and how we can then make sure that we're getting the best outcomes and not getting the negative effects, which could be pain or injury.